finally we have the first major update to the PlayStation Portal since its original release. And whilst it's definitely a step in the right direction, all is not as it seems. And that's putting it lightly. Now, over the last 7 months, Sony have released a number of minor updates which have addressed mainly stability and performance issues. Version 3.0, which was made available on the 19th of June, is the first update to include feature changes and the first attempt at tackling some of the Portal's biggest complaints. So, what is and is not included in this update? Well, the headline news is that Sony have now added a way to connect to public Wi-Fi networks that lie behind a login page, which is fantastic and long overdue. Up until now, if you wanted to play away from home and you didn't have access to a known Wi-Fi network, you were forced to either tether to your mobile phone or carry a portable mobile data router, both of which were less than ideal. Now, however, you can connect to public Wi-Fi at hotels, coffee shops, airports, fast food outlets, and public facilities. Or can you? Well, there was really only one way to find out, so I took my Portal on a bit of a road trip and tested it in as many public Wi-Fi locations as I could find. In the end, I tested it at McDonald's, Starbucks, 3 separate supermarkets and cafes, a public leisure centre, a public library, Costa Coffee, a Wetherspoons pub, and at a Premier Inn hotel. And out of those 10 locations, using their publicly available Wi-Fi, the Portal successfully connected to my PlayStation 5 back at home once. Just once. And that was only because that particular location didn't have a login landing page for their Wi-Fi, meaning that would have worked anyway just fine before this update. So how did this happen and why was it so terrible? Well, there are 2 explanations, and for the first, we turn to the small print of the update notes. On them, it states that the PlayStation Portal might not support connections to certain public networks such as 5 GHz networks. And on the official PlayStation blog, it reads that public networks that operate on 5 GHz are not supported. Sony's only explanation for this is that it's for compliance with country and regional regulations. However, this is a major problem because 100% of the locations that I visited used 5 GHz Wi-Fi. And just to be clear, it's not that the Portal itself doesn't support 5 GHz, it does. It streams great on 5 GHz and is the preferred faster frequency to connect to if the Portal has the choice. And that is the crux of the problem, because the Portal will always prefer 5 GHz given the choice. All of the public Wi-Fi networks that I tested operated dual band Wi-Fi. That's where a wireless network has a single name or SSID, but broadcasts on both 2.4 and 5 GHz frequencies. If you're connecting to public Wi-Fi and your Portal has chosen to connect to the 5 GHz frequency, then you will get this error message, and you won't be able to go any further. There's nothing you can do about that because you can't force your Portal to connect to one particular frequency over another. Sure, you can do it if you're a network administrator, but these are public networks, and the chances of finding somebody that can actually help you connect your Portal are very, very slim. To make sure that this was indeed what was happening, I created a guest Wi-Fi network behind a login page at home on my UniFi router. At first, I set it to only broadcast the guest network using just 5 GHz, and sure enough, the Portal wouldn't connect, and threw up the same error messages as earlier. I then disabled the 5 GHz frequency and enabled just the 2.4 one. I attempted to reconnect the Portal and a few seconds later was presented with a QR code. This QR code will not show when you try and connect via 5 GHz, but is the only way that you can either agree to the terms or input the additional information that the public Wi-Fi network requires. When you scan the QR code, your phone creates a temporary ad hoc network connection between the portal and the phone. Using your phone, you then enter the required information and the portal will authenticate. And once you are authenticated on the network, any frequency restrictions become a thing of the past. In other words, you can't use 5 GHz to authenticate the connection, but if you do somehow manage to get connected, 5 GHz will be then just fine. Make sense of that? So to verify this, I switched my test guest network back to 5 GHz once the portal was connected and authenticated via 2.4, and it continued to work without any issues at all. The 5 GHz restriction is only in place at that initial connection and authentication stage. I say only like it's a minor issue, but it's really not, because it will stop you from connecting, in my experience at least, to the vast majority of public Wi-Fi networks. And that is if you can even find those networks in the first place, because since this new update, my portal has had significant issues detecting public Wi-Fi SSIDs. In fact, at quite a few of my test locations, I had to manually connect to the network by referencing and copying the network name from my phone. I'm not entirely sure why this was the case, but my best guess is that the portal is hiding networks that it doesn't think it will successfully connect to. In other words, nearly all public Wi-Fi. Each of the 10 locations that I tested at used dual band Wi-Fi, but only 8 of them had an actual login landing page. Costa Coffee run an open network with no login information required. They also don't have much in the way of firewall restrictions, which is why it was the only location where I had any success at all. And like I said earlier, this would have worked anyway before this update. The signal quality at Costa was quite poor, and even after I moved seats to be sat right next to the access point, it still wasn't the best. Morrison's Cafe was very similar to Costa in that it didn't also have a login landing page. However, the connection that the portal was trying to establish was being blocked by the firewall, which meant that although it was connected to the network, it couldn't actually work. There was one location though where dual band Wi-Fi was configured, but the portal actually connected to the 2.4 frequency instead of the 5, and that was at a public library. That particular library is located in a very old building made of very old, very solid stone. Plus, it's a publicly funded building, which means that you can more or less guarantee that the internet provision there is going to be awful, which it was. The 2.4 GHz signal was the stronger of the two, which is why the portal connected to it over the 5. It was the only location outside of my controlled test at home where I actually got the QR code to show. However, due to the terrible Wi-Fi signal quality, the portal simply would not connect to the PS5. Despite my best efforts, I couldn't find a solid signal spot within the library, but if I had, you can be sure that the portal would have jumped onto the 5 GHz frequency and we'd be back to square one. I have to say, I am hugely disappointed with this update. When Sony did their press release, there was a lot of positivity, especially from media outlets praising these public Wi-Fi changes. But in reality, they just don't exist, not in the real world at least. These half measures are extremely frustrating and only add to the narrative that Sony isn't listening to its customers. And that brings me to the issue of the micro stutter. Personally, it doesn't bother me. In fact, I can't even see it, but it is a big issue for a lot of people, and Sony are yet to even acknowledge it. So you won't be surprised to find out that there is nothing in this update to address it. Now, I am acutely aware that this video is turning quite negative, so let's touch on some of the positive features that actually are included in this new update. Sony have added some nice quality of life changes to the way that the portal's touchscreen works so that it responds and behaves a bit more like the touchpad on a DualSense controller. As you can see, wherever you move your finger on either side of the screen is where you get this sort of trail effect. There's no haptic feedback on it, but it is a nice addition. They've also finally added an option to change the battery level indicator to a percentage instead of the default battery bar symbol. This should have been an option from launch in my opinion, but it's better to have it late than never. To enable this, you just have to go to Options, tap on System, then on Battery, and enable the green tick box for the percentage option. I'm afraid there's still no change on the minimum volume level, which remains ridiculously loud, meaning that you still can't enjoy a quick game on the sofa with the family in the room without getting on their nerves. Not without some headphones at least. I'd be extremely grateful if somebody could explain in some detail why Sony have restricted 5 GHz networks from being able to authenticate public Wi-Fi connections. If anybody does, please let me know in the comments below. I'd also appreciate anybody sharing their successes or disappointments with this update too. Maybe, collectively we can get something together and get some answers from Sony. Stranger things have happened. Anyway, like always, thank you for watching, and a special thank you to anybody that has liked, commented or subscribed. It means a lot.